Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and prove that it's not just beginner's luck. Very thankful. Usually when academics present at TED, they show off some of their research. And I don't have any research yet. So I really hope you'll invite me back some other time too, because I'm planning to do some truly extraordinary research. I just have to, as soon as I figure out how, and also what. So today instead, I'm going to try to offer a speculation as to how and why movements arise. I'm going to try to string together different pieces of anthropology, philosophy, and psychology to see if we can understand why religions arise, why ideologies and cults and sects, and maybe even fitness regimes arise. I haven't seen these thoughts put together in this way anywhere else in the literature. And by the literature, I, of course, mean YouTube. So here it goes. The fundamental unit of any movement is the ritual. And my analysis begins with Professor J.G. Fraser, who was one of the fathers of anthropology. He was a Cambridge scholar, and in the 19th century, he comprised a huge book called The Golden Bough. In The Golden Bough, Fraser systematically explains how so-called savages and their primitive rituals, those rituals stem from what he calls an inaccurate causal inference based on a random temporal correlation of events. So for instance, this Native American would dance for rain in order to make it rain because they had experienced at random before that it had worked. They'd just happened to dance and then it would rain. So in this sense, Fraser's view of the ritual isn't very dissimilar from the radical behaviorist B.F. Skinner's view of the ritual. Skinner did his famous superstitious pigeons experiment, where he randomly assigned rewards and punishments completely at random to pigeons, much like real life, some might say. And soon enough, after a while, the pigeons started believing that what they did before the reward was somehow instrumental in acquiring it. So he could show rows of pigeons that would stand on one leg, jump 2 times, peck 4 times at the wall, superstitiously believing that that would somehow increase the likelihood of them receiving a reward. Now, another Cambridge scholar, the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, fundamentally rejected Fraser's work because he believed that the method, Fraser's method, was all wrong. He wrote that Fraser only sees the ritual as a transaction. If you do this, then you get that. And this, to Wittgenstein, was way too narrow. He claimed that the real essence of ritual is performance and expression. And he wrote, "We can only describe and say, human life is like this." To explain what he was talking about, he used the metaphor of stomping the ground or hitting the ground when you're mad. We've all done this at some point in our lives, not because we actually think that we can instrumentally make the world be nicer to us by punishing it, but as a cathartic expression of something inside of us. We've all yelled at our computer from time to time, not because we can actually, by that behavior, make it change its cooperative attitude. Unless you're really autistic, a hug is much more than just an instrumental way of signifying a relationship with someone. And presumably, none of these athletes actually believe that causing themselves mild genital pain is going to improve their performance anytime soon. By the way, really awkward to search for these photos on a work computer. If the IT guy at NHH finds out, I'm liable to get a warning. Stop looking at silhouettes of male genitalia during work hours. So, but Wittgenstein's point is that if you look at the ritual stripped down only as a transaction. If you do this, then you get that. You may lose so much of its inherent meaning that you no longer understand what it's all about. Who amongst you like football? Raise your hands. Excellent, quite a few. Any one of you ever been told, presumably by someone who doesn't like football, that it's just a bunch of guys kicking a ball around? Yeah. Well, in a sense, that's true. If you look at it purely from a transactional point of view, that is the transaction taking place on the pitch. It's a bunch of guys kicking a ball around. But if you care about the game, and you care about the outcome of the game, you know that it's so much more. So, Wittgenstein wrote, "We can only describe and say human life is like this." Well, I believe that today we can do better, or we can at least be more precise. I believe that recent research in moral psychology, particularly the research of Professor Jonathan Haidt, has given us a tool or a heuristic to understanding how and why some movements arise. And a couple of things you need to know about moral psychology. First of all, we make moral decisions every day. We're intuitive moral thinkers. It's a big part of our lives. And usually the way we do moral reasoning is opposite of what you might think. Usually it starts out as a gut level feeling of knowing right from wrong, and then you try to make ex post rationalizations, arguments as to why something is right and something is wrong. The other thing you need to know about moral motivation is that it's extreme. Moral motivation can cause us to do extreme harm and extreme good, and it can make us do things in groups that we would never otherwise do in solitude. The third thing you need to know about moral psychology are, of course, the 5 pillars of the human moral psyche. These are 5 universal themes that echo across all cultures, all religions, all cults and sects, across all countries and continents and ethnicities, because as has been pointed out, we're all ethnic. The first one is harm care. So these are moral notions of when you're supposed to care for one another and under what circumstances you're allowed to do harm or even expected to do harm. The second is fairness, reciprocity, moral obligations pertaining to sharing, distribution of wealth, and the fair treatment of your fellow man. Thirdly is in-group loyalty, the notion that somehow your own kind is supposed to be treated differently, may be treated differently than others. And along with that comes the fourth theme, which is authority, to respect for authorities, leaders, priests, chiefs, teachers, parents even. And the fifth theme is purity, sanctity, the universal human proclivity to see some aspects of life as pure and sacred and others as impure and maybe even filthy. Now, these 5 themes comprise what you might think of as our human moral hardware, our operative system. And anyone who wants to write code, anyone who wants to write moral software, needs to make sure that the code they use is compatible with this operative system, because we come pre-programmed with this moral hardware. It's organized ahead of experience. Just like Sverre was talking about, it's evolutionarily adaptable. Human beings have for millennia been losers when operating alone. I really enjoyed the picture of the Stone Age networking. I couldn't help imagining like Stone Age people with white wine in their glasses and piano music in a conference hotel and going like, "Oh, so what are you in?" I'm in Stone Axis. "Oh, that's really interesting. I'm in mammoth killing. We have so much to talk about. Here's a business rock. My wife's in berries." No. We're losers alone, but winners when operating in groups. And the 4 first themes are there because they ensure group cohesion, group harmony, and cooperation. And the 5th theme also, when you think about it, is very adaptable in an evolutionary sense. If you imagine the Homo erectus 200,000 years ago, standing there, and a member of his own tribe touches his feces, and then goes on to touch the food supply. Now he would, or indeed his infant child, He would be outraged at that. You can almost sense still the outrage you feel when thinking about the scenario. And that outrage would serve him well, even though he didn't know anything about germs or the actual causes of disease. Now, Haidt goes on by echoing a lot of existential philosophers in saying that the ultimate goal, the ultimate motif in joining a group is transcendence. So existential philosophy basically takes out the starting point and saying you're born into this world involuntarily, and the only real promise you're given at the outset is that you're going to die. Even if you innovate, you're going to die. At NHH, we say innovate or die, but existential philosophers would shrug and say, man, you're probably going to die anyway. And so we seek uplifting from this dreary and depressing and scary, but annoyingly loyal realizations that we're all fundamentally alone and that we're all going to die. And we do so by trying to get engaged in some sort of movement, a set of ideals that seems big and powerful and meaningful to us. So so-called savages performing a ritual are actually trying to achieve a higher sensation of relatedness with one another and possibly also with nature. Otherwise completely nice and friendly Germans felt an ecstatic sense of being part of something really forceful and powerful and meaningful to them when they took part in trance-like Nazi rallies in Germany in the 30s and 40s. We may all experience this when we go to rock concerts and sing out in groups things like, "But I still haven't found what I'm looking for," or indeed, "I'm on a highway to hell," for that matter. And maybe we can even achieve some of this transcendent sensation when doing physical exercise together, and that's a speculation I will return to. But for now, allow me to do what academics seldom get to do, which is state my obvious speculation. And that is, any movement that seeks to gather and maintain momentum needs to look beyond their transactional proposition and invoke the 5 pillars of moral psychology. Now, it's pretty easy to see that all 5 major religions do this perfectly. The software is compatible with our moral hardware. And indeed, if my reasoning is correct, they wouldn't have been as successful if they didn't. The big major ideologies of the 20th century also come perfectly fitted to our moral psyche. It doesn't take a historian to find clear-cut examples of all 5 moral themes in the dogma of both Nazism and communism. But today, then, in the West, the Western state, what movements can we expect? Well, a lot of scholars have written on the notion that today fewer and fewer people, especially young people, look to organized religion for spiritual uplifting and transcendence. And we've had our experiment with extreme political ideology, and we've left them behind. So today, many scholars believe that we, the young generation, I say we, that we have turned our innate capacity for worship inwards. We've turned ourselves into our own gods. And as we stare at our own belly buttons, we realize that the temple for our new God is our body. And much like you would expect religious people to build beautiful temples in which to worship their gods, we head to the gym in large numbers and with great enthusiasm to improve on our temple. But the gym, in this metaphor, can only be equated to the multi-faith prayer rooms you find at airports. Everyone goes in there with a different set of ideals, a different set of dogma, and different ideas on how to achieve what they're looking for. So it's very difficult to achieve true religious transcendence at a multi-faith prayer room, just like it's very difficult to feel anything but loneliness and solitude when going alone to the gym. But if you want, if you've ever tried, you know what I'm talking about. But if you want to see the true hallelujah-style religious ceremony within the field of physical exercise today, you need to look at some of the newer group-based physical exercise regimes that have hit the market, like CrossFit and Barry's Bootcamp. And I'm, just as a point of illustration, going to talk about CrossFit. So, to most people, CrossFit is just a fitness regime. But to many of its members, it's a movement. It's a military-style, high-intensity workout that invokes an element of competition. It requires very little equipment. Most of the time, they just use their own bodies as equipment. Yet it's very expensive. A monthly membership in Oslo costs about 1,000 kroner, which is roughly 125 euros. So that's more than most gyms. So, given that transactional offering in mind, that you're paying so much money to do something that's free. Push-ups and sit-ups are free. We can do them anytime we want. We never do, but we can. It's pretty strange to see how rapidly CrossFit is growing. From its meager beginnings in the early 2000s, the growth of both numbers of centers and paying members has exploded on all 5 continents. What is it about us that we're willing to pay so much money to get to do sit-ups in groups? Why? How can this be? And again, I of course believe that we need to look beyond the transactional offering to understand the success of this movement. CrossFit invokes the 5 pillars of the moral psyche perfectly. First of all, it's obsessed with the notion of harm care. Suffering for good is a moral virtue. Bleeding from your hands after a session is a moral virtue. But they're also mindful that there are right and wrong kinds of hurt. So if you have back pain because you've executed the exercises wrong, that's cause of moral distress, actually. And because there's an element of competition there, they're very, very, very concerned with fairness and reciprocity. If you want to see what true moral indignation looks like, head down to your local CrossFit center and do squats, but do them less deep and easier, like so. And look at the reactions that those around you while you're standing there. They get mad. At best, they'll just mumble behind your back, "God, that pisses me off. He's doing it wrong." And because their brand is so easily imitatable, they deploy tons of in-group loyalty mechanisms. Like they learn everyone's names, and they call themselves a family. And like Starbucks, they utilize their own vocabulary to try to make it seem more different than it actually is. And they have nothing but disdain for other forms of physical activity. Each center has a leader, and the leader tells you every day what you're supposed to do. And we like that. We like following the leader. When we've chosen to follow a leader, we enjoy having a leader present. And they've also farmed their own global leaders, world CrossFit champions, whose lives are documented by the second on YouTube, so that we may learn from their example. And finally, they have the fifth, the purity sanctity issue. They have their own set of dietary recommendations. And as with many dietary recommendations today, they're riddled with unempirical and childish notions of purity and sanctity. And of course, there's a transactional value in eating healthy, but the way they think about it, the way we think about it is actually we give it away in how we talk about it. So it would be something like, I'm not putting that filth into my body. I only eat clean food, natural food, not chemical food. And specifically to CrossFit, that clean, unchemical food is the food that you would expect people to have eaten in the Upper Paleolithic era. So it's known as the Paleo diet or the Stone Age diet. Because when it comes to human nutrition, mankind peaked during the Stone Age, apparently. Everything was awesome back then. So in every sense of the word, CrossFit is a fitness regime. But in almost every other sense of the word, CrossFit is a cult. And many of its members realize this, and I can admit to being one of them. But I think for many people, it fills a void in our lives, a void that's been left open by religious atheism and political apathy. So to wrap up, any movement that seeks to gather and maintain momentum needs to look beyond their transactional offering and invoke the 5 pillars of moral psychology. And the ultimate human motivation for joining any movement is achieving transcendence. And as human beings, we will search for it anywhere we can find it. When people stand together in groups and do physical exercise with a high pulse and music is roaring and their hands are bleeding, they get to feel part of that uplifting sensation. The 5 pillars of moral psychology in and of themselves are completely void of moral value. It's just an organization. It doesn't have any dogma. Like the human hand, it has the capacity for extreme good and extreme evil. But if you really want to create a movement, if you want this kind of cultish consumers that Apple was able to get, or if you want to create the movement that will finally make us do the things that we need to do in order to stop climate change and save the world, every TED Talk has to end with something about climate change and saving the world. If you want to do those things, you need to keep the 5 pillars of moral psychology in the back of your head, and that will serve you well. Thank you very much.